Welcome to Clouded Dreams. I'm Sarah, and today we are going to continue the watercolor background texture lesson. We are doing 8 different texture techniques. They're all different from the previous 8, and let's get started. So today we're going to go over our second demonstration on watercolor techniques. The following video is going to be over watercolor resist. And today we're going to blow watercolor around. We're going to do rice. I'm going to put down clear gesso. I have some gauze. You can do medical gauze also, you don't have to have this. I have watercolor pencils, sandpaper, and using other elements like nature, like plants, and then creating designs with patterns. So I'm going to clear this. Okay. So to start with, we are going to splatter some paint on here, and then I'm going to get my straw and I'm going to blow it around. I also wanted to demonstrate dripping paint. Whenever you tilt the paper, it's actually going to drip for you. So what you do is you tilt the paper, not up enough, like that, and the greater the angle, I didn't really want it to go that far, but that's okay. The longer your drip's going to be. We'll leave that there. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's how you do your dripping. You can also control it a little bit more by going ahead and drawing down your drips and then putting your paint on, tilting your paper, and it will follow that line of water. So if you want more control over it. This one is really interesting if you want really organic tree shapes. You can put a blob down and then blow it out and it'll create little branches for you. Or if you make the dots smaller and you have it like an explosion, you can blow out your explosion. You don't have to use a straw, you can use a straw. You can use a hairdryer to make your little droplets spread out. If you leave it to dry at an angle, then the very bottom where all the water pools is going to be your darker area, but you have to let it dry with that bead of water at the bottom. If you want it to be a more continuous color throughout, then let that color fill up everywhere. Okay, for our next thing we're going to put rice down. I didn't label this. The area is all thoroughly wet. I'm going to get my rice from the kitchen, and I'm going to sprinkle my rice onto my paper. This is another one of those patience things. You're going to have to let it sit there and dry, but it will be darker under where all the rice sits. It kind of absorbs the water to it. Might put a little bit more darker on this section so you can see what adding watercolor after the fact will give us. Our third area is going to be gesso. So what we're going to do, I have clear gesso, but you can use any kind of gesso. It's just going to create a texture on top of the paper. I'm going to shake it up really well, and then I'm going to put it directly onto, I didn't label it again. So I'm going to use a somewhat dry brush, and I'm going to move my gesso around. You don't have to have it thick, although you can if you want. So instead of a smooth surface that you'll be painting on,
this is going to pick up the patterns from whatever you're doing with it. And I'm just going to create little valleys with ours. You can do just about anything. I'm going to not have lead, and I'm going to draw lines through it. And I'm going to do little circles down here. We're going to let that one dry also, and then we'll drop paint back into it. While this one dries, we're going to go on to the other ones and then come back to putting color onto that gesso. But I want you to notice that there's quite a bit of actual texture to it. You can see my little swirls and my straight lines that I drew, and you can see the little indentions that the paintbrush created on that. It gives you a surface, and the paint is going to settle into these grooves and become darker. Okay, so this one is going to be our gauze. We're going to take our little strings. This works with string or yarn or anything that has some absorbency to it. And we're going to lay it out, and I kind of want some of these loose ends to be. And I want to gently tap it down onto. We're going to go ahead and cut away the extra. And like I added extra paint on this one, I'm going to go ahead and add extra paint after I have it down on this side also, so that we can see the difference in having added paint after the fact. We're going to let this one dry also. This one's getting there. It's not quite dry enough to mess with. This one's definitely not. This one takes patience, just like this. We're going to remove things at the end. Okay, so this rectangle is going to be our watercolor shavings. And we're going to do this 2 different ways. And then we're going to take our colors. You can either take a X-Acto knife and scrape little pieces off into your wet paint like this, but you have to work fast enough so that it doesn't dry before your shavings are on. Or we're going to put down some shavings. Then we will get our little water bottle and then let it dry. So you can notice where the water, it fans out, and then I'm going to let it dry. So this is kind of like a confetti effect. So this is great if you want a really controlled, bright color. Instead of flicking paint with your paintbrush or with a stiff bristled brush, this one will give you little chaotic dots in a similar style, but you know exactly where they're going and you know how dark they're going to be. Our sandpaper. Sandpaper is going to rough up the surface. Rougher the sandpaper, the more it's going to scratch into your paper surface, and it's going to adjust what your what results you get of how it absorbs. It changes how your paper absorbs the paint. You'll see. Be careful with the rougher paper or rougher sandpaper, because you can sand all the way through your paper. Okay, so now we're going to put a wash over our roughed up paper. You'll notice on this one, it's created these little almost orange peel look on the paper. It's not as smooth like your wash on a not sandpapered area is going to give you a more cohesive, consistent color. This one, everywhere the paper's rippled and the sandpaper took away, it creates these little roughed up area, and the paper absorbs the paint differently. So if you want maybe a grass area, this one looks more like grass to me. Okay. Our next area is going to be now I'm going to get my little fern piece, although you can do it with other leaves, and I'm going to press it into my paper. I'm going to bring it down just a little bit so this tip can be in there. And then I'm going to set my eraser on it, although that's not needed. What I'm doing now is just getting my leaf to sit smoothly onto my paper. Wherever it doesn't sit down, like these edges are peeking up, it's not going to give you any imprint at all. All of this, where it's set down really nicely, is really going to give us the best impression. All I did was try to get as much area of my leaf stuck down to the paint surface as I could. So all of these little edges, which I'm sure you can kind of see, that don't sit on the edge, these are not going to give me any pattern onto the paper. And some of this isn't either. But all of this at the top should give me a decent impression. Okay, so while this is drying and this one's drying and this one's drying, we are going to go ahead and put down our patterns. I'm using a template for mine. I'm using this little plastic template, and it's kind of this tile pattern. I'm going to lay it here. I'm going to get this little sea sponge, and we're going to like pounce, bob up and down. We're going to put our color on like this. The wetter your sponges and your paper, the more likely it's going to bleed under the little plastic thing. This is not a exact process. That's part of the fun of watercolor. The drier your brush is, though, the more likely you're going to get exact results from your sponging. But the wetter it is, so let's say from here we spray the paper, and I have enough water that some of it's going to seep under, and then load my color. So the wetter I'm actually brushing it on here. See how it's going underneath the little template? This is part of what watercolor is going to give you. All this. So, if it's really dry, you're not going to have as much seepage under your little plastic seams. If it's really wet, you're probably going to get quite a bit of it, and you'll lose some of that crisp edge. And this one I just painted in. I painted him, I had it pressed down, and I painted where I wanted the color to be. But you can let this dry, put it down over where your things are, and then paint back in a little bit darker so you have some bleeding under, but you still can see your design. So there's a lot of playing room for this one. We're going to go ahead and put color down on this gesso one. This one feels like magic a little bit because it's all white, and then you paint over it and you start getting all your little indentions to show up. Especially this down here, you can see my little circles. You can put multiple layers of gesso down and build up thicker texture so that you can see it better. You can lay your color down like this, and then once it's dry you can remove just the top area so it shows your texture even more. I'm going to get a Q-tip, I'm going to wet it, and I'm going to softly run it over the top of my circles so you can start to see that texture show up, and it has like this beveled feel to it. We're going to put this back on top like this. Actually, we're going to do it offset. We're going to do like this. And we're going to sponge on I'm going to draw in some of the, just so we have that example too. I mean, my watercolor pencils. There's a lot going on here, but the whole point of this is to show you different methods for creating interesting backgrounds that aren't just one wash with your subject in the foreground. You can splatter paint or do shavings so that you have these little dots. This is great for doing trees or explosions or fireworks. This one's great for doing, maybe you want a pattern of brick, or you just want something to break up solid areas. This one's ready to take off. It creates this really interesting darker area everywhere the string was. We can probably go ahead and just take off our salt. You just brushed away. So you'll see that it creates this real light impression where the rice was whenever you just add it to an existing wash, and if you put more paint on around the rice, it gives you a darker pooling around where that was after the fact. The same is observed here. It's really light where the gauze was pressed into your initial wash, and whenever you add more paint or pigment after the fact, then it creates this darker pooling of paint around whatever you've added to it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take it and gently take it away. I didn't wait long enough. That's okay. You can still get the gist of it, the pattern where the thread. This is what I have for you today. Our final texture techniques for watercolor. The next video is going to be on resist, using tapes and mediums to remove after you've painted your watercolor on. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you next time. Bye.